first question for you guys. I'm going to start this off with a trivia question, and then I'll let you guys noodle on it, and then at the end, whoever answers the question first will get the prize. This isn't the question, though. How many of you guys are here because you have to be? To be honest now, come on. It's all right. I didn't really have a lot of choice either. It's okay. All right, so here's the trivia question for you guys, and then I'll start talking. I want you guys to know, somebody to tell me the famous movie star that came from Indiana, Pennsylvania, grew up in the town of Indiana, PA. Very famous. Kevin Spacey. No. So you guys can just noodle on that.
Where do you come from?
Indiana, PA. Decorated war veteran, movie star. Okay. So what I was asked to do was come and kind of talk about my career a little bit. I think it was how to succeed and survive in your career. The first thing I want to say is don't do what I did. That's probably the best advice I can give you because I've made a lot of mistakes along the way. And so I'll kind of talk through my career a little bit here, and I'll kind of share some of the things that I think I've learned along the way. Just for the record, I'm only halfway done. I still got 20 years before I can retire because I have kids and a wife and stuff like that. So it's going to be a minute before I stop working. But I'll just kind of share with you guys what I think I've learned along the way. And, you know, I noticed that there's a lot of non-traditional students here. So some of what I say is going to be directed at more first-time, entry-level. And some of the stuff I'm going to say will probably resonate with you as a non-traditional student who's got some life experience. You know, maybe got kicked in the shins a few times or two, right? Because it's happened to all of us. First off, I did graduate from Indiana University of Pennsylvania. To be clear, I have a degree in literature because my parents said, hey, do something you like in college. I like to read, so that's what I did. What they didn't tell me is that it's really hard to get a job with a degree in literature. And so most people ask me, well, what were you going to do with that? Were you going to be a teacher? And Indiana University of Pennsylvania is a teacher's college. The state of Pennsylvania, where I grew up, has a whole system of them. They're called the teachers' colleges, and they're legacy schools, and they date back to the 1920s. But no, I never wanted to be a teacher because I taught swimming in the summers to young kids. And I could get them to swim, but you know who I didn't like? I didn't like their parents because they were a pain in my butt. So I knew that I didn't want to be a teacher because I didn't want to deal with parents. What I wanted to do, there were a couple different things. I wanted to get my PhD and talk about literature and talk about literary criticism and kind of break it down. And unfortunately for Lydia and Whitney, every now and then we do that at work just because I don't feel like doing what I'm supposed to be. So we do that stuff. But I don't do it as a career. When I graduated and I decided not to pursue a PhD, I thought, well, I'm a reasonably creative guy, I think, right? So I'd like to write copy for advertising. Well, you need an internship for that. You need a portfolio. You need to have done something, which I had not. So lesson number one, guys, the more work experience you can get that applies to what you think you want to do, the better off you are. And that pertains no matter where you're at in your life. You've got to kind of get out there and do it a little bit. Test the waters. It's the best, it's best for you. And trust me, I learned that the hard way. I graduated from college in 1995. I was on the 5-year plan. I transferred and did stuff like that. There were girls and all that stuff. And my father, who was a 20-year Navy guy, he put his arm around me as we left the big ceremony. He said, Ken, I don't have a gift for you. Your education is its own reward. You know, my father and mother were non-traditional students. They both got their degrees the same time I did. My mother had an advanced degree in American Studies, and my father got a degree in finance, but he was a blue-collar guy. He was a shop steward at 3 Mile Island. If anybody can tell me what happened there, I'll give you one of these other prizes. So, Ken, I don't have a gift for you. Your education is its own reward, and I just want you to know that now you are obligated to educate your children, right? He wanted to make sure that education continued in our family. He said, but don't come home. I can't live with you and your mother in the same house. don't do it. And I didn't. So I didn't have a place to live, and I didn't have a job, so I had a car, and it was a little blue Saab, and it needed struts, but I was going to live there. So, that's not so bad. It's just like camping, really. It wasn't too bad. But there was a girl, and anyway, I ended up sleeping in a basement somewhere on a couch. But I didn't really know what to do. I couldn't get a job in advertising because I didn't have a portfolio. And I didn't want to be a teacher. Trust me, it wouldn't have been a good idea. I'd have been fired like that because of the parents, right? It's not the kids, it's the parents. So I'd spent a year in grad school. Didn't like that. Just didn't want to do it anymore. Had enough of school. And ended up working construction. And as part of that construction job, first I learned that I like to work with my hands. And that was kind of cool. It's really neat to be able to produce something at the end of the day and say, yeah, I did that, right? And I wasn't very good, just for the record, but I liked doing it. In that job, I ended up working, we did a house remodel for a vice president of sales for a cellular phone company. And that's how I got my first job. I just ended up talking to the guy one day, and he said, yeah, come down for an interview. Now, I didn't get the job because I talked to him. I had to interview. But that's how I got connected to my first job. And so that's another thing that you guys should think about is how do you network? Who are you talking to, and how are you talking to them? Right? I knew I needed to do something different. I wasn't going to be in construction my whole life. It just didn't pay well enough. And there was that girl, and I wanted to put a ring on her finger, so, I had to do something. So I ended up, and this will date me, I sold cellular phones right after Ma Bell broke everything up. And so the company I worked for was Aerial Communications, and it was the very first network that allowed you to text message. Now, how many people here have never not been able to text message? About half of you, right? Well, when I was growing up, we didn't have any of that stuff. So I spent some time in sales, which I swore I would never do. I'm never going into sales, I said. So when I went into sales, I spent a couple years doing that and bouncing around. And trust me when I tell you, the retail world is, it's just tough. And there are people that do it. They make a career out of it, and they can make a very good living, but it wasn't for me. I ended up going to work for a company called Fastenal, selling industrial supplies. And so what was really cool about that job is it was the best business education I've ever had. I've never taken a business class. I don't have accounting. I don't have microeconomics. I don't have macroeconomics. I don't have finance. I don't have any of that stuff. And you guys are all better prepared for the business world than I am by nature of your education. But Fastenal, where I ran my own branch eventually, taught me the basics. I had an inventory. I had to make sales calls. I had to manage employees. I had to make a number, right? I had to run a business. And that business was industrial supplies, nuts and bolts, which is a pretty simple little thing. It's not, although you'd be surprised how much cool stuff you can get in there, but it's pretty simple. It's nuts and bolts, man. It's screws, it's nails, it's all that stuff. But here's where I got started in supply chain, because we weren't selling screws and fasteners and all that stuff. What were we selling? We were selling supply chain management. We were selling bin stocks. We were selling convenience and outsourcing of storeroom management. That's really what we were selling. And so what Fastenal did differently, and I could tell you that whole story, but you can look it up too. It's based out of Winona, Minnesota. It's publicly traded. What Fastenal was really doing is they were saying, hey, look, in this space where people, in this maintenance space, where people have typically spent a lot of time managing their storerooms, we can come in and do that, and we'll charge you a little bit of a premium, not a lot of a premium, because nuts and bolts aren't big, right? It might charge you a penny on a 1 cent bolt or a 5 cent bolt, but that's not a lot. But what did it do? It freed up the maintenance guy to go off and do something else, right? That's supply chain management. And that's where I learned the golden rule in supply chain management, which is the more you touch it, the more it costs. And folks, that applies to everything you do. That applies to maintenance and operations. How many of you guys have ever been in a manufacturing plant? Ever seen something? How many of you seen it on TV? Car factories, right? They have robots. Why? Because the more a human touches it, the more it costs, because humans carry a cost. I'm not there as a hobby, man. They got to pay for my time, right? And so, I mean, some people might be independently wealthy, but I'm not. So, because I'm human and because there's a cost for me being there, the more I touch it, the more it costs. And what that means is, if I can streamline the process, if I can eliminate touches, then I can bring value to my customer, and I can reduce their costs even if I charge them more for the product. So that was my first exposure to supply chain. And it just happened to be in industrial stuff. And remember, just a couple of years before that, I'd figured out that I like to work with my hands. So it was like a kid in a candy store. I really kind of enjoyed it. Well, this is in Pittsburgh, PA. Has anybody here ever been to Pittsburgh? Do we have any Steeler fans in the house? Whoop, whoop. No? Well, I'm done. So I was outside of Pittsburgh, and one of my customers was US Airways. Now, how many of you have ever been in sales, some form of sales, where there's a quota, you got to meet a number? So you know that if that's how you feed yourself, you're going to figure this out, right? So the US Airways people in the office would not talk to me, but the guys in the hangars would. So I figured out how to get in the hangar, and I found a guy there. And the guy handed me Granger's book. And I don't know if you guys know who Granger is, but that was my competition. I mean, that was the Yankees to my Red Sox, right? And he just gave me the book and said, make sure you don't charge me more than them. And so, man, I was in, and it was great. And I did that for about a year. I sold to him. And then one day I walked in, and he put this job description out there. He said, you need to apply. And I said, well, what's it pay? And he told me, and this is a while ago, so it was mid-30s, which is a lot of damn money to me. And so I applied, and I got the job. And I was a materials planner. Now remember, I've just learned that the more you touch it, the more it costs. And now I'm a material planner for the Airbus fleet for all of US Airways. And it was the Airbus interior, so there was a lot of funky stuff in there, for the record. You're just like, I can't believe we have to do this. But, anyway. There was actually this one thing, I'm not kidding you when I tell you that I spent a full week of my life trying to procure and plan the stupid flower vase that goes in the lavatory of an Airbus 300. I couldn't find it. Nobody had it, but we had to have it. So it was, you could really train a monkey to do what I did, because it was really just using some logic. Here's how many we have. Here's how many we use. Here's how many we stock. Here's how many, I don't want to touch it too many times. Why? Because the more you touch it, the more it costs. But I don't want to have too much, because I don't want all my working capital tied up in Airbus 300 interior parts. So I spent about 9 months doing that. And I had a friend who was working at American Airlines at the time. And after about 9 months, he called me up and said, hey, send me your resume. I said, good, because I hate this place. All right. And I ended up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which I loved. And American Airlines was another great learning experience for me, because it was my first exposure to sourcing and commodity management. And so I understand supply chain, because the more you touch it, the more it costs. But what I'd never really gotten to do before is manage my own stuff. And I started by managing their common aerospace hardware and their MRO, maintenance repair operations, right? Janitorial supplies, basically, for all of the maintenance base in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And then this is what I found out what I really like to do. I got to negotiate. And so my mom used to yell at me for arguing with my brothers and sisters all the time. I wasn't an easy kid, I guess. Remember what my dad said? But I didn't realize that I could actually make a career doing that stuff. And so that's where I learned that I like to negotiate. I kind of learned how to negotiate a little bit. I've had some opportunities since then. So I'm in the aerospace industry now, and I'm loving life, and I'm doing well. And guys, this is where I made my first major mistake. I mean, aside from the English degree. I was worried about other people. I didn't mind my own business, right? You worry about you, they worry about them, and I had to learn that lesson the hard way. I got my feelings hurt because some guy came in and he was making more money than me. I didn't need to know how much he made, but I did, and it made me mad, and so I made an ultimatum. And they said, look, here's what we can give you. And I said, nope. I drew that line in the sand and I left. And so I just figured out what I wanted to do a couple years earlier. I was only there for like 3 years. And then I left and I went back into sales, and that was dumb. I hated it. I was miserable. So I spent 3 years in sales again, and it was awful. And I moved back to Pennsylvania because that's where my wife wanted to be. And I did move her next to her parents, and she hated that. So then we could move anywhere, like Georgia. And I was lucky. Again, I met somebody. One of my customers was Gulfstream Aerospace, and that's how I got hooked up with them. And so I applied at Gulfstream for a year and a half. A year and a half, I sent my resume in at every stinking buyer's job they had. Every one. And I just kept getting rejected. I'm a pretty smart guy, I think. I think I get it. I think I can do this stuff, but man, they didn't want me for anything. And then it was, I was at American Airlines when 9/11 happened, right? And that was a rough day for everybody there. And it really kind of, put the industry into a nosedive. So I went into sales. It wasn't a great time. Finally, so I was in sales, and I hated it. And so what happens when you don't like what you're doing? Hey, you got no passion. And plus, I had US Airways as a customer, and those guys were killing me. They were cheap, and they were miserable. And you remember I used to work there, so it was worse for me. And I wasn't doing very well. Frankly, I wasn't making my numbers. And it was time, and they came in and they laid me off. And, those are mixed blessings, because I knew I didn't need to be there anymore. I was traveling all the time. I had 2 kids. I was missing their childhood. I missed a lot of stuff. And but I needed a job because I have 2 kids, and so the day I got let go on a Monday, and I got a call on Wednesday, and I had an interview with Gulfstream. So there was some divine interference, I think. I don't know. Maybe it's just lined up that way. But I ended up going to Gulfstream Aerospace and managing their, I was a supervisor for the G450, G550 engine programs, which was cool. And it was sexy as hell, man. I was flying all over to Germany and England and France. And I did that for about, a year and a half, and then I was promoted to manager of the group. My boss got promoted. She pulled me up. And that's where I was managing that $1.4 billion. We had the wings, the empennage, the avionics, the mechanical systems, the engines. And then we shifted a little bit, and I just had all engines. I had 450, 550, 650 new programs, and it was cool. And I was traveling all over the world. And then my son turned 6. And it's a real shame that I don't ever tell a story about when my daughter turned 6. She was 8. But my son turned 6, and it was time for Cub Scouts, and Gulfstream was killing me. Like, literally. I was 14 hours a day, every day, on call every weekend. And I got calls. They didn't leave me alone because I owned those engines. They were mine. I owned it all. And that comes with big expectations. And here's the thing, that corporate America will take everything you give them. And I would recommend to you that you give them enough, but you don't have to give it all to them. So I left Gulfstream, which was a cool job. Now, you went. I mean, that's pretty cool, isn't it? There's nothing cooler than seeing a green aircraft take off. There's nothing cooler. Like I used to go to Germany because that's where our engines were manufactured. I sit in a room, and I'm not kidding you when I tell you there were real rocket scientists in the room. And I was the dumbest guy by far, by a mile. I was the dumbest guy in that room, and it was cool, and it was fun. And those guys were great. But I needed to be a better dad, so that's what I chose, right? And so whenever Lydia asked me to speak up here, then I went to Georgia Pacific, and I spent a year and a half as the purchasing manager at Savannah mill. We had about $18 million in inventory. We spent about $200 million at that plant annually. I had a team of 5 buyers, 13 people in the storeroom, and it was my first exposure to procurement operations, the tactical side of procurement. So at American Airlines, I did commodity management and sourcing. At Gulfstream, I did program management and contract management. Well, at Georgia Pacific, I did procurement operations. It's the tactical side. Now, we learned a long time ago what? The more you touch it, the more it costs. So that's kind of what I started doing, streamlining some stuff. Hey, let's quit touching stuff so much, right? Our systems are garbage. I mean, they're great, but they're really garbage, and you touch it too much, and there's just a lot of stuff, but there's ways to simplify it, so that's how I attacked it. After about a year and a half, I was asked to come up here to Atlanta as the Director of Inventory. Just so you guys know, I hate inventory. I am not an inventory guy. It takes a special person to be an inventory guy. And if anybody here is an inventory guy, we have jobs for you, because it is miserable. For me. But I said, that's right. And there are people that love it. Right? You have to look yourself in the mirror and know who you are, and I do. And it just wasn't my bag. I love to negotiate, and there's not a lot of negotiating in an inventory storeroom. But I took it because when you start thinking about supply chain, there's a whole lot to it. There are 3 distinct supply chains out there, and we talked about this earlier. There's your raw material supply chain, right? How do you get the stuff that you need to make something? There's a lot of logistics and stuff involved in that. Then there's your manufacturing supply chain, MRO. Who here knows what that means? Maintenance, repair, and operations. So when you're running a factory, it costs money. Why? Because you got to keep your stuff up. I'm going to assume that most people in here have a car, except for these 2. I don't think they have cars yet, but most of you guys have a car, right? How many of you change the oil on a regular basis? Well, you all better raise your hand or your dads are going to be mad. If you don't change the oil, what happens to your car? If you don't fix the brakes, what happens to your car? You don't stop, you're wrecking somebody else's stuff too, right? That is the manufacturing environment. To make something, you gotta keep the equipment running. It's called reliability. And then you've got the supply chain of getting the product, the finished product to your customers, distribution and logistics. It's supply chain, end to end, cradle to grave, but there's 3 distinct spaces in there. Now, there's an essay that I recommend everybody read because it really helps you connect with how much goes into manufacturing. And I want you, when you read this, if you choose to, I can't give you homework because I'm not grading your papers or anything, but if you read this, I want you to think about the golden rule. The more you touch it, the more it costs. And it's called I-pencil, right? And basically, the thesis of I-pencil says there is not one human being on the face of the earth that has the enough knowledge to make a pencil. What? Read the essay. It's pretty good. So I'm at Georgia Pacific now, and I moved out of the inventory role. We'd started some things. We'd started to change the conversation. Because inventory is it's an element of reliability, but it costs money. It requires working capital. And if you listen to the accountants, it's all about the dollars. And if you listen to the maintenance guys, it's all about reliability. How do I keep the plant running, right? And if you've ever worked in a manufacturing environment and you've ever been on the wrong end of a call at 2 o'clock because something broke down and you don't have the part, trust me when I tell you, you're putting it in inventory. There's a balance there, right? And so we changed the conversation because I have to market myself. I have to market what I do to influence people to get them to do what I want them to do. And so after we had started that, I was asked to start this capability, introduce this capability to one of our businesses that had never had it before. And so that's what I'm doing now, is I'm building a capability. I'm introducing procurement operations, the tactical side of procurement, to our corrugated plants. We have approximately 38 active corrugating plants around the United States, three different businesses, so to speak, inside of that business. And what my real job is sales. I'm influencing and changing culture. That's what my job is. I also have a small team that does regional sourcing, so every now and then I get to negotiate, right? Because Lord knows if I didn't, my head might explode. But, so that's what I do. And the thing about it is well, let me see where I'm at here. The thing about it is that I've never had, I'm doing things, this is probably the most difficult thing I've ever had to do, except for the inventory piece, because I just didn't like it. But it's probably the most rewarding thing I've ever had to do too. Because over the last year and a half, we have seen a distinct change in the culture and the way that we're being utilized as a resource within the company. And so that kind of falls back to something called market-based management, which is our management philosophy at GP, right? And one thing about market-based management is that I wrote the definition down because I can't ever remember it, but it's a management philosophy that enables organizations to succeed long-term by applying the principles that allow free societies to prosper. So that's the management philosophy we use, and we say all the time that we're principle-based, not rules-based. So I have a couple people on my team here that will tell you that we don't generally make up a rule unless we have to. Now, there are reasons to make up rules. For instance, safety. There's stuff you're not going to do, and I'm not going to let you do it because it's going to kill you, and I don't want you dead. Nobody should ever have to worry about whether or not they're going to come home tonight, right? But in general, what we believe is, we believe that if we give intelligent, rational human beings some guidelines, then something called spontaneous order will occur, and you'll figure out how to get it done. And not only will you figure out how to get it done, because we are self-interested, and trust me when I tell you, you are all self-interested. Because we're self-interested, you're going to figure out how to get it done, and you're going to figure out how to get it done in a way that most benefits you. And since we're all a little bit lazy, at least, let me say this, I'm a little bit lazy. I'm going to try to figure out how to get it done the easiest way possible, the most efficient way possible for me. Right? Because that's because we're human. That's what we have. And I don't know about you guys, but I got other stuff I want to do every day. I got kids, I got scouts, I got volleyball and soccer, and all that stuff. So you guys may have noticed as I talk through this, and I promise you I'm almost done, that I've worked for a lot of different companies. And that's okay. Because what I've done is I've experienced a lot of different cultures. And I promise you that with my English degree, I needed to move around a bit so I could get paid, because that's what I'm there for. Not in a negative way, but I mean, come on. You know, Dad, remember Dad? Don't come home? That stuff. So, but the reason why I stay at GP is because of the culture, because of MBM. And market-based management makes it pretty easy to succeed. Right now, I'm basically managing my own business within the parameters, the guidelines of Georgia Pacific. And I get frustrated every day, you know, because people don't always do what I want them to. But I got to learn I got to manage that. And so Georgia Pacific's a great place. And I tell you, the thing I like the most about the culture, because that's the first question everybody asks, what do you like the most about Georgia Pacific in the interviews? They say, do you have any questions? And they say, yes. What do you like most about Georgia Pacific? Oh, I'm glad you asked. I like the culture. I like the people. And it's the first place I've ever worked. I've worked for a lot of places. It is the first company I've ever worked for where I believe in my heart that the senior management is held to the same standards that I am, of behavior, of performance, of everything. And that's a pretty good place to be, guys. Because trust me when I tell you, whenever you're working for somebody and they're not doing anything, and they're not pitching in, and you think that they've got different set of rules for themselves, how do you like it? Nobody likes that. So if you ever lead people, keep that in mind. Right? Nobody likes that. And the truth of the matter is people don't leave jobs. They don't leave companies. You know what they leave? They leave people. They leave managers. Right? So everything you do in your career is really about people. So, one of the things that I've been asked to talk about is, how you remember this is how do you survive your career, right? And I'm only halfway there, guys, but here are the characteristics that I believe have helped me progress in my career. Okay? I'm going to read them out to you. I have a lot of ownership. Remember the engines, they were mine. Trust me, I didn't want anybody messing with them, but I also didn't want them to call me at 2 a.m. So you got a work ethic. There are people that are more talented than me. There's a lot of people smarter than me. But by God, nobody should outwork me. Right? I control that. I tell my kids that all the time. I don't think they listen, but I tell them. People skills, active listening, a willingness to communicate. And for those of you that don't know what that is, go read about it. I can't stress it to you enough. We have little classes in my office, and I try to teach this to a lot of people. And by the way, remember how I was never going to be in sales? Well, being in sales is probably one of the greatest things that ever happened to me because I learned how to actively listen. Because you got to sell people stuff, and that's how you do it. Personal accountability, it goes back to that ownership piece. I own me, right? There's nobody else to blame, and it's been a long time since I could say it was somebody else's fault. Critical thinking, there are 2 things you're here to learn. This may come as a shock to some of you. Remember, you're all consumers, right? You're all paying to be here, or somebody's paying for you to be here. But there's 2 things you're here to learn. You'll learn how to think critically and communicate effectively. And if you can do those 2 things when you leave here, you're going to be effective and an excellent employee, right? Trust me. The other characteristics that allowed me to succeed in my chosen career, I love to negotiate. I'm willing to learn sometimes. Last, I would tell you that I am very self-aware. Now, that means that I see the warts. I don't always choose to do anything about the warts, but I see them, and I know that they're there. And my team will tell you that I think I'm right more often than they think I'm right. They're not afraid to tell me when I'm not right, and sometimes they are right that I'm not right, but I don't admit it at work very often. But I'm willing to have that conversation, and I know that there are faults, and I'll give you this little story. Many of you know Lydia Hall. Lydia, raise your hand. Lydia knows me. We've worked together for 2 years now. Lydia knows that I'm distracted, easily distracted, sometimes forgetful, and quite often tardy. And these are flaws. But she knows that, so Lydia knows how to work with me. And she and I have a great relationship, I think. She'll tell you later if it's true. But we have a good relationship where Lydia sometimes does things for me. And for instance, she said, hey, Ken, here's what I think you should cover tonight. And hey, Ken, here are the things that you need to be aware of for tonight. Because she really was instrumental in asking me to be here, and I appreciate that, right? And I appreciate the fact that Lydia knows me well enough to say, hey, here's what you're going to need to stay between the lines for me, right? And I know that, and I appreciate it. So what are the things that I've had to overcome? My mouth. It's big, and sometimes it gets me in trouble. And for those of you that are familiar with that, let me tell you right now, I say it to my kids, don't be like me, be better than me. Shut your mouth. Listen with your ears. I tell my Cub Scouts that all the time. They're 8, so they got room. Worrying about other people. I told you my story, guys. Don't worry about other people. You do you. Right? I've had to overcome that. It was a painful experience. Tone and language. I am a Yankee. I grew up in Pennsylvania, and I am direct. But I'm even direct for a Yankee. So I got to work on that. Sometimes you got to soften the edges, guys. Just being honest doesn't mean you got to be brutal. And emotion. I told you that I own stuff. I told you that I get passionate. And passion leads to emotion. Emotion leads to irrational thinking. Reactions, stuff like that. Guys, these are all things that I've had to deal with in my career. These are all mistakes that I've made. God bless it. I've had to survive it, right? And I can tell you, these are all things that if you don't control in your lives, you'll have to survive them too. And when I say survive, I mean you're going to be on a piece of wood floating out in the middle of the ocean wondering what the heck you're going to do. And, a ship will come along. I promise you that. But it sucks while you're doing it. So, what are the kind of things that we're looking for? At GP, what are the kind of things we're looking for? Well, I was also asked to talk about, this. What time does all this stuff wrap up?
Soon.
All right, I'll wrap it up soon. So we're always looking for transformational talent. And what that means is we're looking for talent and we're looking for innovation. We're looking for capable young professionals to come in and help us change because we value that. We're looking for work ethic. We're looking for innovation. We're looking for drive, people skills, curiosity, a willingness to grow, and be self-managed. These are all characteristics that we're looking for in the interview process. Why? Because I'm not there to hold your hand. I'm not your dad. I'm not your mom. I'm not here to clean up after you. I need you to come in and do a job. I'm going to pay you for that, right? You do you. I'm going to give you everything you need to succeed, I promise. But giving you what you need to succeed is not quite the same as holding your hand and taking you there, right? The workforce is not an everybody gets a trophy place. So these are the kind of things you have to have whenever to succeed. And one of the things I want to really stress to you, you work on your soft skills. It's important. Listen. Trust me when I tell you it's important. There's a process you can learn to do that. It's called consultative listening or selling and whatever. But it's a consultative process. And think critically. And here's the most important part about it. When I say think critically, what I mean is whenever you encounter an obstacle, a problem in your life, sometimes you're going to need help. I get it. I need help too. I have a boss and I go see him and I ask for help. Hey, what do you think? But I very rarely go to my boss without some suggestions because I am the expert. I am closest to it. If you go to your supervisor and you don't have some suggestions, well, I've got to learn everything that you know so that I can figure out what to do. But if I have to do that, you know who I don't need? So think critically, come up with some solutions. That's a pretty effective way to be thought of as a leader in your role and to advance in your career. All right, so that's basically it, guys. That's Ken Baker's 40 minutes on how to survive your career. Don't do what I did, right? You worry about you. Manage your emotions. What else is there? Yeah, that's about it.
Now we got time for questions.
Yeah. Do you guys have any questions? Anyone? Well, first off, let's go back to the trivia question.
Which one?
It is Jimmy Stewart. Atta girl. And for those of you that don't know who that is, he's coming on TV pretty soon.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Grew up in Indiana, PA. His house is now a parking lot. And I'm not kidding you. Do you guys have any questions about anything else? Can anybody tell me what happened at 3 Mile Island? Wait, no, not some kind. That's not good. Give me a. It did have a meltdown. The core melted. Go ahead. That's the answer I was looking for. Yes, it was. The cleanup lasted from 1979 to 1993, and it put me through college. Okay, guys, if you don't have any questions for me about all that other stuff we talked about, have a great night.